Welcome to Edge TV. I'm Nathan Brown. It's great to have you with us, and we're asking you to endure this episode. Endure is defined as to hold out against, sustain without impairment or yielding, to undergo, to bear without resistance or with patience, to tolerate. It's an interesting way to begin talking about the problem of pain. Tell me a time when you've endured pain.
I fell off my bike once and ripped my knee open with my fishing pole when it broke and went into my knee and pulled a big chunk of my leg out. That was painful.
I'm wincing.
I've got two.
Yeah.
The first one was when I was much younger and I got kicked out of Sabbath school because I was laughing, and I was playing in the courtyard and I jumped off something. I jumped off a platform, but the skirt of my Sabbath dress got caught and I got levered into the bitumen and snapped my tooth off.
Oh dear.
And the second one is waking up from knee surgery and screaming and crying in pain. That was pretty awful. But I didn't have to endure that pain very long because...
Happy way to start a TV show.
Yes.
Jared.
I was playing basketball and chipped my ankle, apparently. It rolled and that night swelled bigger and bigger and bigger and wouldn't go down, and that was extremely painful. The other was an earache. My ear got infected. My eardrum actually burst during the process. Before it bursting was sweet relief. Before it burst, I was going insane with the pain, because when there's something in your head just throbbing, you just...
Can't get away from it.
Not pleasant.
Well, I've broken my left arm twice, my right arm once, had my appendix out, that was enormously painful, gallbladder out. I also fell in the shower, smashed a tile with my elbow and sliced my back open, requiring 17 stitches. So I know a bit about pain.
I don't want to sit next to you anymore, it sounds too dangerous. Pain is a part of life, as we know it at least. An interesting thing to talk about. Perhaps not such an interesting thing to experience, or not something that we would experience necessarily by choice. We asked a group of young people some questions about their experiences of pain and their thoughts on it.
7 months or so ago, I was racing my friend on my dirt bike and I turned a corner really fast, and my back tyre jumped a rock and I broke my knee and my arm.
Yeah, I was trying to be cool in the rain and doing a donut around the clothesline, and I hit the clothesline. Whew, what a surprise.
When people are, hurting me or something, I laugh. I don't know why. I must be twisted or something.
Most of the time the shock kicks in a lot and I tend to not realise what's happening, and just usually if it's, a hurt knee, I'll just keep walking, not realise it's even there, and just keep going what I'm doing.
When you're being in pain, it helps you to realise what other people are going through, and that what you're going through isn't as bad as what it could be.
Emotional pain makes you mentally tough. Physical pain makes you physically tough. Oh, it also teaches you not to do it again. But I guess there's also the spiritual pain, but you don't even realise you have that. I mean, that's for someone who doesn't know of that kind of stuff and doesn't realise it until after they learn. So.
Edge TV, it's good to have you with us. Continuing our discussion of pain and endurance. It's an interesting kind of word. Adele, you've been thinking a little on this topic.
But yeah, I was thinking bad and painful things always happen in life, and we can't really avoid it. I think it's just part of the world being a sinful place, and there's not always a reason for it. I think we like to have sort of a cause and effect for why things happen, but usually there's not always a explanation. And one of the most comprehensive examples of pain in the Bible is the book of Job, and his life was one of complete devotion to God, and things were really perfect. But then, this thing of Satan going to God and asking if you can basically have a go at Job and see what happens. And God says, well, okay, do your best. And instead of, Job having everything going perfectly. He loses his children, he loses his possessions, and everything's sort of decimated. And on top of that, he gets boils really badly and has 3 painful friends to deal with. Instead of cursing God, he sort of ends up engaging God in conversation and discovering more that God understands our pain and all that. And there's just so much more that we don't understand about the universe and life. And God sort of challenges Job, sort of with things of, do you understand this about the universe, or that? And there's so much more than just our short little lifespans. I think also Jesus understood pain and suffering when he was here on earth as well, and he would do his best to take away people's pain and suffering. And I think God knows what we go through, and he does care about us, and even if we are suffering for no particular good reason, he still is interested in us and still cares.
That's a kind of big picture perspective on pain, and we'll probably get back to that. For a small picture perspective on pain, let's go to Scott's silly answer.
How much would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Actually, a woodchuck would chuck no wood, since a woodchuck can't chuck wood. But if a woodchuck could chuck and woodchucks some amount of wood, how much would a woodchuck chuck? Well, even if a woodchuck could chuck wood, and even if a woodchuck would chuck wood, should a woodchuck chuck wood? That's the question we really need to ask ourselves. The reality is, a woodchuck should chuck wood as long as a woodchuck could chuck wood, and as long as a woodchuck would chuck wood. To answer the initial question, however, we must first have a closer look at what it is really asking. The dictionary has several meanings of the word chuck. Tap, throw and vomit are just a few of its definitions. Also, a woodchuck, as discovered in my research, is actually a groundhog, weasel or whistle pig. Finally, we should also be sure of the definition of wood. This can mean either the hard fibrous substance beneath the bark of a tree, a golf club or a keg. And so by substituting these terms into the questions, I've come up with 3 possibilities as what to the question is actually intending to ask, and I've answered each. Question 1. How much hard fibrous substance beneath the bark of a tree would a groundhog tap if the groundhog would tap the hard fibrous substance between the bark of a tree? Answer: enough to produce a handful of sawdust. Question number 2. How much of a keg would a weasel throw if a weasel would throw a keg? Answer: enough to hold a handful of sawdust. Question 3. How much of a golf driver would a whistle pig vomit if a whistle pig would vomit a golf driver? Answer: enough to require a handful of sawdust. While we can speculate until the woodchuck chucks which definition the question intends, the only thing we know for sure is that if you see a woodchuck about to chuck wood, you'd better either be wearing safety goggles and an apron or stand well back.
Scott's silly answer on Edge TV. We'll continue our discussion of pain and suffering and endurance after this break. Welcome back to Edge TV, where we're enduring. And on that subject, let's check out Dave on the Edge with another wincing anecdote from his adventures.
This is Dave on the Edge. When I was a little boy, our family went camping for a week or 2 every summer. And when we would go camping, there were so many fun things to do. One time, we went into the camp store. This was at Yosemite, and they've got a camp store and a camp hospital and a camp everything. And there's so many tourists and visitors. And so we went into the camp store, and there was this whole cabinet full of knives. little knives, big knives, hunting knives, fishing knives, and there was a few Swiss Army knives, you know, the red ones with all the blades that come out, and I wanted one of the medium-sized Swiss Army knives so bad, and I was trying to convince my dad. I was about 8 years old, and he said, oh, I don't know if you're old enough to handle a knife properly. I tried everything to convince him, and finally he said, okay, I'll get it for you, but I'm going to teach you how to use it, and you have to promise me that you'll only use it the way that I teach you. I said, oh, yeah, I'll do exactly what you say. So we got back to the campsite. He sat me down in a chair. He put a stick in my hand, and he said, and he showed me first, he said, always cut away from yourself. Cut away from yourself. Cut away from yourself. Never pull the knife towards you, and always keep it out in front of you. Never pull it in close. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And so I was cutting away from myself and keeping it, and I was whittling this stick down to make something, I don't know. And as I was doing it, I was getting so into it that I didn't realize the stick was getting closer and closer to my leg. And I was wearing a pair of shorts until I felt the tip of the knife just have some resistance against it as I went, and I looked down and I had a gash about that long in my leg. And I said, oh, Dad? And he said from inside the caravan, you've cut yourself, haven't you? I said, yeah. And he came out and he looked, took me to the camp hospital, and they stitched me up. I got 7 stitches on my leg. I've still got a scar there to prove it. And I learned a valuable lesson. I'd followed all the instructions that he gave me, but I hadn't paid close enough attention. And I learned that sometimes, even when we're following the rules, we still need to think for ourselves and be careful. This has been Dave on the Edge. Where do you stand?
Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.
One of the things that we look at when we are experiencing pain is just how do you deal with it? How do you cope with pain?
I think when you try and block it, or one of coping mechanisms that I have is if you're distracted by something, like I sliced my finger open with a chisel at one stage and it wasn't worrying me too much. I just thought, oh, it's a nick, I'll go and clean it up. When I saw how deep the wound was, that's when I started feeling a bit lightheaded and a bit, this could be more serious. And that's when it impacted me more. So if we're distracted or thinking about something else, I think we can cope with it easier.
But do you mean physical or emotional pain with that?
Because physical pain, it's easy to, if you smash your thumb open, you can go take a painkiller, and it'll eventually go away. Emotional pain is not. Sure, there's antidepressants, and I don't want to, make fun of that or think that that's very light-hearted or anything, but it's a little harder to manage emotional pain sort of with something outside yourself. And a lot of people try with, all kinds of ways, but how effective that is.
And that's one of those cases where I don't know if distraction is necessarily a good thing, because sometimes we do need to deal with things that are causing us pain and just get on with it and examine it and try to work through it as well, and so we can get to a point where we're not suffering from the pain anymore.
Well, even getting back to Jared's example, if you just ignore what you've just done to your thumb or whatever, that might not be the best way to actually, it might help you deal with the actual physical pain, but you might have a problem to be solved.
Well, you hear those stories about people who are so scared of going to the dentist. They've got this painful tooth, but they're too scared of the pain the dentist will cause, and they're sitting till they're moaning with pain and can't do anything, and then they finally go, and it's this huge relief. Although it's been a painful thing to have the pain, fixed, it's still a good thing.
When I stub my toe, some people, or just about anything, if I hurt myself on accident, then some people will swear or they'll say something that that they didn't mean to say.
Yes.
For some reason, ever since I was a kid, and I still do it, if anything happens, I'll say, I hate pain. That's just what I just refer it directly to what the problem is, and I hate pain. And I think probably with emotional pain, my wife laughs at me when I do that too, because she's like, I don't know how you can do that. But with emotional pain, probably one of the main things is to identify what it is that's causing the pain, and to say it's not that I hate you or I hate you or I hate this life, it's something's happening to me, and what is it that's hurting you right now, and to be able to refer the pain to that thing, and then probably the first step to helping you heal.
So is pain, I guess our first assumption is to say pain's bad, and we try to avoid it. What are the uses of pain? It
can stop you hurting yourself anymore. If you touch a burning hot plate and it hurts a little bit, you're not going to leave your hand on there so it can warn you that things are going to get worse.
Yeah, it lets you know when things are going wrong. It's the sort of first response, I guess, almost.
Sometimes it makes you slow down. You know, if you throw your back out or have a migraine, you have to actually lay down. And sometimes pain it actually helps you take care of yourself.
Also, there's an aspect of pain that's like, you say, oh, the trials have made me stronger, or something's happened. I mean, guitar players, they have calluses on their fingers where they've done it so often that it's hardened it up. And so it's more pain. And so I think our life experiences and stuff can give us experience in life and can give us knowledge and, things like that can help us with other things. Next issue that comes up, we're more ready to deal with it.
So the pain we've experienced can help us avoid more pain in the future.
Or maybe not avoid it, but give us ability to cope with it and
yeah,
work through it.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a cliche, well, it is probably, about growing through our pain or growing because of pain, and that it does change us as a person. And that in turn can help us in different ways, whether it's being more sympathetic to others and you can help them through their pain, or I guess ultimately pain, just in some situations at least, can point us towards God. And that's kind of a mixed blessing. And I'm sure many people would prefer to be pointed to God for ways that are more fun. But yeah, that's something it's a reality of life. Let's check out a Bible perspective on this issue with Clancy.
Life is not always happy or easy, and the Christian life is no exception. There is no guarantee when we decide to follow Jesus that life is going to be a cruise from here on in. The New Testament warns of trouble and difficulty. Jesus speaks in Matthew 5:11-12 of persecution and trouble for those who follow him. It is not just persecution or hostility for what we believe that makes life hard. Grief and trauma, brokenness and pain are all around us. Genesis tells us that this is not how life is supposed to be, that death and pain and hard times are not part of God's original plan for us, but they are part of life in our sinful world. Jesus promised in Matthew 5:4 that those who mourn will be comforted. And ultimately we see this fulfilled in Revelation 21, where God promises to wipe away all tears and remake the world into a place where sorrow and pain do not exist. But while we were here on earth, we can play a part in making Jesus' promise of comfort come true. Because following Jesus is not something we do in isolation. Believers are referred to as a body, linked together by a common faith. We have a responsibility to our fellow believers, a responsibility to support and care for one another, to lift one another up, to comfort each other. Ecclesiastes 4:9-12 says, 2 are better than 1. If they fall down, they can help each other up. If 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can 1 keep warm alone? Though 1 may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Life is difficult, but we can help one another, support and care for one another. The life of Jesus is filled with accounts of him healing those who are broken and hurting. Jesus had compassion on those who suffered and those that were in pain and difficulty. And as followers of Jesus, we could do worse than follow his example. I'm Clancy Rogers for Edge TV.
You're enduring Edge TV, and it's good that you are. We're talking about the problem of pain, and it's one of the classic philosophical wrestlings of Christian faith is simply, why do bad things happen to good people? Or if God is good and loving, why is this thing going wrong in my life? Why am I enduring pain? Why am I going through this tragedy?
Yeah, I always find it interesting when stuff happens to people. There's been something bad happen, or a friend has died, for example, and they're very angry at God because sort of God did it. And what's interesting is that we end up, and not in only that scenario or even necessarily in that scenario, but we end up blaming God for a whole lot of stuff that people do to each other, and we blame God for what we do to ourselves, and we blame God for what people do to us. And I think there comes a point where we need to take some responsibility for the things that we do to other people, the things, and we need to we need to place the responsibility on other people as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think also to recognise that the world is a sinful place and bad things just happen.
Yep.
And instead of blaming it on God, I think that's such a stupid thing that people do. I'm sorry,
That's
but
a
it
harsh
really
thing to
is.
say.
Because it's sort of like, if anything good comes, it's like, oh, thank you, God. But bad things aren't really necessarily from God. There might be something that, he does, like the flood, that kind of stuff. But, most of the things that happen in life, it's just a bad thing that happens. And you can't say that God caused it or, it's God's fault. I think that's just a bit silly.
I mean, often, to be fair, often when people say why did God let this happen? It's not, some people do blame God, but they blame him by omission.
Allowing it. Yeah.
It's it is. I mean, often people are looking for some kind of explanation. Why did this happen? And that's a shock response, a grieving response, a pain response. It's a natural response for the way things are. And I think probably, as you said, Clancy, it's more, rather than blaming God, it's sort of, we have all these stories and that God can intervene and that God does heal some people. Why not?
Revelation 12 paints this picture of the entire epic great controversy, and and at the end of it, it's only 18 verses long, but at the end of it you get this picture of the devil, the dragon, saying, I can't get the baby, I can't get the woman, which is the church. So he couldn't get Jesus, couldn't get the church, couldn't get heaven. And so he says, so I will make war on the rest of her children. And that's everyone who's alive in the end times. And so a lot of the bad stuff that's happening is the devil trying to make us think bad of God, because he doesn't care about us. He doesn't care if he hurts us. He really wants to hurt God, and he couldn't get him. He couldn't, so many different ways he tried. So finally he just said, if I can't get directly to God, I'll just hurt him by hurting who he loves. And that's us. And that's why a lot of bad things happen, is because the devil set up his schemes and sometimes direct attacks to hurt people.
Yeah, I think there's a problem also, Christians assume that, by being Christian, nothing bad will ever happen, or, they'll never get depressed or never feel pain. But, I think that's a bit unrealistic, because bad things are still going to happen. And, it's not like God provides this automatic magic protection or something like that, for people. Whereas, you choose to be a Christian and suddenly everything is perfect.
Yes.
Otherwise everyone would be
Christian. They
would say, well,
That's right. And God doesn't promise that.
No.
And there are various versions of Christianity that seem to say if you just pray hard enough, if you have enough faith, it'll all work out for you and everything will be great. And then the problem with that is it even adds this extra layer of guilt.
Exactly.
Because if something bad happens to you, it's not just that something bad, it's also that you don't have enough faith to stop that something bad. And it sort of accumulates into this extra problem that you've got to wrestle with at the same time.
And then I think that can lead to people being, sort of reticent about sharing their problems with other Christians, just in case the other Christian is like, well, obviously you've not been praying hard enough, and that doesn't help anyone.
I think that, and Adele, earlier you mentioned the book of Job and that amazing story of where you get to see behind the scenes of almost, and Philip Yancey describes it as like God and the devil having a bet on this guy. Said, he only serves you because things are going fine. If things go wrong, he'll curse you and he'll give up on the whole idea. And so God says, well, let's give it a shot. I reckon he'll be right.
And what's interesting about that story is Job is not happy with God. Job yells at God. He doesn't curse God. He gets pretty cranky. And what's very interesting is this idea of, of course we know that Christians just will experience pain, and sometimes that sort of level of guilt transcends to the next stage. All right, so if I do experience pain, I have to react to it this way. I can't get upset. I can't, dwell on it or anything. I've got to feel good about it. And I think that's not always very easy to do.
The other thing, even though reading the book of Job, you see what happened between God and the devil, Job never gets that explanation.
No.
He just gets this picture at the end where God says, well, look at this amazing world, you don't understand it, but at least I turned up.
And Job just says, I placed my hand over my mouth.
That's it.
I never said anything worth listening to. I'm sorry.
And another reading from Yancey of that story is that God could have turned up and read the phone book. And Job would have been just as impressed, because all the way through he's been saying, God why won't you answer me? Why can't I hear something from you? And the silence of God is more the problem in that stage than what he's actually going through. And so the real point is that God actually did turn up and gave him that, at least some kind of answer, even though it didn't actually answer the questions that he had.
And another comforting thought, God did turn up. God with us, Jesus came and experienced all of those pains, all crucifixion, the most painful way they knew how to kill a person, and Jesus experienced all of those things emotionally, physically, and that's comforting that he's there, but that we do have to endure that, but it's not terminal, it's not going to last forever. We're not meant to be pained.
Cool. Jared, tell us what you've discovered about more that we can find on this topic.
If you go to www.edgeonweb.org, we've got a column about dealing with grief with Deb Jones. She's a columnist that writes a few questions from the readers in some of our issues. So also behind the scenes, if you'd like to know more about Edge TV and what went on and how we made it, in issue 73 you'll be able to find some photos and an explanation, and it's all good fun.
Some of that kind of stuff. Thank you for enduring Edge TV. It's part of living the life and believing in Christ, or the other way around, believe in Christ and live the life. We'll catch you next time.